Jai Radha Madhava Kunjo Bihari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Pramang Samparibrajacharya Sukhareshwar Smada Kirtan Saraswati Goswami Bhagavad Jai Nanda Gauri Vaishnava Ki Jai Ramacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Name Sita Ho Sri Krishna Dev Radha Shivasari Gaur Sri Radha Krishna Bho Gopinath Sankand Radha Nagari वृंदावन धाम की जाए नवदीप धाम की जाए गंगा माई की जाए जमुना माई की जाए द्वारका धाम की जाए स्वामी तो भक्तवृंद की जाए और ग्लोरी टू दैट और ग्लोरी टू दैट थैंक यू वेरी मच जय राम
Hare Krishna, everybody. Hope all of you can hear me and see my screen.
Hare Krishna. Yes, we
Hare
can.
Krishna. So, welcome. We'll get started with our discussion on Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 3, Karma Yoga, Excellent Krishna Consciousness. I believe we completed verse number 35 last week. And
Yep, that's right.
Thank you. So we'll continue with verse number 36. So we are approaching the tail end of the chapter. Depending upon how we go, we might be able to complete this today or maybe in 2 sessions. Let's see. Okay, verse number 36. Arjuna uvacha athakena prayuktoyam papam charati purusaha anicham api varsneya balad iva niyojitaha. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Shri A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada. Translation. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Okay. Getting a message from Maulik. He's waiting in the lobby. I don't see him. Let me see if this is the right link we are using. Is there a different link? See.
I just sent the new link out on WhatsApp.
Oh, okay. Maybe I need to update the link in the WhatsApp group. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Maybe should we? Yeah, I think he will join. Hopefully, click on that. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Hare Krishna Maulik. We just started.
Hare
We just read
Krishna,
the
Jai
translation.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. We just read the translation of verse number 36. So I'll repeat again. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? So this particular question, so Arjuna had asked a question in the beginning of chapter 3. That's how the chapter 3 began. And Krishna gives an elaborate response to that question. The question was, if knowledge is important, why do you engage me in this ghastly war, right? And so Krishna responded. Now Arjuna is asking another follow-up question. Nitin Prabhu, please use the new link. That was. Sure, I have one. Okay, there it is. Okay, so if you remember the end of chapter 2, Arjuna also asks a question. So after Krishna provides the analytical explanation, first of all, elaborates on what the nature of the soul is, right? Then he elaborates on why Krishna, why Arjuna should fight, why he should perform his duty. And after that, all that explanation is over, Arjuna asks a follow-up question in chapter 2. Does anyone recall what that follow-up question was? It was a similar question to this, but at the flip side of it. So the question that Arjuna asked at the end of second chapter is, well, because Krishna concludes or emphasizes on how one should maintain equilibrium, right? One should be situated in yoga. One should not be affected by dualities of the world, right? One should be equipoised, and one should do their duties without any fruitive motives, right? So that's what Krishna is saying. And then after that, Arjuna asks, oh, can you tell me the symptoms of such a self-realized person? How does he talk? How does he walk, right? So, that's the follow-up questions asked, because Krishna is saying this is what one should do, right? This is how you should be equipoised. So then naturally, Arjuna is curious. Well, how do I determine if somebody is at that platform or not? What are the symptoms of such a personality, right? So that was chapter 2, and then Arjuna is, because he is not sure if knowledge is higher or action, karma is higher, and that's why he asks the question. And so Krishna elaborates on that, and then he introduces the concept of yajna. And now, after all that explanation is over, Arjuna is asking a similar question, but now he is asking the opposite of it. Is that he already got the answer at the end of second chapter on what the nature of what are the characteristics of a self-realized person. Now he is asking what are the characteristics, or not the characteristics, but somebody who is the opposite of a self-realized person, one who is not a Goswami, one who is a Godas, one who is a servant of senses, right? And why is it that one is impelled? He understands that this force is so powerful that one is impelled to act as if against one's nature, in the sense that not the nature of the occupational duties, but the idea that even if somebody is trying to restrain the senses, one is forced to impel and act into, as if impelled to act in sinful activity. So Arjuna is naturally curious. Why is that? Why does that happen, right? So let's see the logical sequence. Why does Arjuna ask this question? So just before this, verse number 35, right? Krishna is emphasizing on why one should do their own duty as opposed to doing somebody else's duty perfectly. It's better to do one's own duty even if it's done imperfectly, right? So before that, he's saying, in just few verses before that, he says that those who out of envy disregard the teachings, who do not follow them regularly, they are considered bereft of all knowledge. They are befooled. They are ruined in their endeavors, right? So, we can surmise that in relation to some of these descriptions, where Krishna is saying, how when one is overcome by the three modes of nature, then one becomes bereft of knowledge, and one acts against the injunctions of the scriptures, right? As if engaged by force. So Arjuna is curious to know why does that happen? Why is one impelled? So rest of the chapter kind of elaborates on that topic. So let's read what's in the purport, and then we'll discuss this. The purport, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that a living entity as part and parcel of the Supreme is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. So nature of the spirit soul is completely pure. The contaminations that we have are the contaminations of mind, intelligence, false ego, of the senses, right? The spirit itself is pure. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when the spirit soul comes in contact with the material nature, the soul acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. So Srila Prabhupada is acknowledging the reality, right? That actually the soul is not affected. Soul itself is not affected by the impurities of the material world, but because the soul identifies itself with matter, because it identifies itself with the body then has to come under the influence of the modes of nature, and then is impelled to act against one's will and engage in many sinful ways. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entity. So it is a nature, but it's not the real nature, you see. It is a perverted nature. The real nature of the living entity is to be purely spiritual. Jiveshu rup hoy Krishner Nityadas. The eternal position of the soul is to be a servant of Krishna. The perverted position is that one comes under the influence of matter, and one wants to enjoy and lord it over, right? One wants to be the master, not a servant. All the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin. He's still forced to act. People many times, it could be subtle, could be gross, right? Sometimes, we know that something is not good for our health, some particular kind of diet. But if, there are instances where there are things that is, there are preparations which are served that we like so much, which are so delicious, we have a special attachment. We have, all of us have our own weaknesses, right? Could be some gulab jamun, or some sweet or some special preparation. and though it might not be good for health, we indulge, as even we know, I don't want to eat, I should not eat, but then we do not you're not able to resist, right? So we know this is not the right thing to do, still we do it, right? So that's one example, but there are many other examples that we can relate to. Now that particular act in itself is not grossly sinful, but the same logic applies. The criminal knows that it's crime, right? But still the criminal will perform the crime, right? You cannot resist. It's forced by habit, right? So it's like that. And then there are other things when people are addicted to different kind of substance abuse, right? And then when they don't get their dose of addiction at a certain time of the day, right? Then they start having this cramps and urges that they are fully overpowered by, and though they know that it's destroying their body, they will just keep on doing it. So sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the super soul. The super soul is neutral. So this body is compared to a tree in which there are two birds residing. Right, the one bird is the enjoyer of the fruit. The other bird is simply an observer. So similarly, in this body, which can be compared to the tree, there are two living entities. One is the soul, Atma, and one is the super soul, Paramatma. The soul is, because of the identification with the body, is busy trying to enjoy the fruits which are offered in this tree, right? So fruits of this tree are the fruits of our labor that the body engages in. But the super soul is not affected by these activities. It's simply an observer. And the super soul is not impelling the soul to act. So these sinful activities are due to another cause, which Krishna will explain in the next verse. So we'll see what's the reasoning. Any questions on this particular verse? I think it's pretty straightforward. Arjuna is posing a question, which is a very logical question.
One
Yes,
question,
Nitin, do you want to
Prabhuji.
say something?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
In the everywhere else we see that Prabhupada mentions, or in the verses also, it's mentioned that the soul is a feminine form, right?
Mhm.
Is the but here Prabhupada is using he for
Yeah, it's a
soul.
good question. Yeah, and a good observation also. Yeah. So the original nature of the spirit soul is pure spirit, and spirit soul is an energy of Krishna. And energy is feminine, right? So all energies are possessed by the energetic, right? There is no, there is no meaning to energetic in the absence of energy, right? So you cannot describe the energetic in absence of energy. And energy does not reside in vacuum, right? Energy is always possessed by an object. If you say an object has a kinetic energy or has a potential energy, this energy, different states of energy don't reside in a vacuum, right? They reside within the objects, and the object is the energetic. Similarly, Krishna is the supreme energetic, and we are all his energies. So, and we are all to be enjoyed by him, right? So Krishna is the only Purusha. We are all Prakriti. And the Purusha is the only enjoyer of the Prakriti, right? No one else is the enjoyer. So we are all secondary enjoyers in a way. So we are all energies of Krishna. So in that sense, you're absolutely right. We are all feminine. So in the description of the soul, most of the times when we see in this description, he referred here, see, but when he is in contact with material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitations, right? So here the pronoun he is used, right? Another instance, although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. So in all these instances, we see that living entity is identifying itself with the body. So the living entity is not acting under the original consciousness that one is a servant and a part and parcel of Krishna. The living entity is acting in material consciousness, and this material world is created so that the living entity can fulfill its desire to lord it over the material nature. We want to be the enjoyer. We want to be the Purusha. And because we want to be the Purusha, we are acting, as a Purusha. And so that masculine attribution to the spirit soul is an perverted attribution. It's not its original nature. Right. So here, I think in this verse, a perverted nature. See, so this masculine attribution to the living entity is a perverted attribution because our act is perverted. So that's why in the text, in all this description, the soul is referred to as masculine. Many times, if you look at the literature, the current trend is to use either gender neutral forms. It's a big challenge in English language, especially with the what you call the current ethos of the society, right? Where the idea is that we want to promote gender equality, right, in all respects. And so the texts, especially historically, now, not Srila Prabhupada books, but in other books, whenever there is a confusion, like should we refer to things which are not clearly male or female, then what should we use? Should we use it? Should we use a gender form? Or the tendency, in order to be safe, there are authors who would use a she, like a baby, right? When you refer to baby, if you go to a pediatric office, they will on purpose, because it just sounds weird, right? It just sounds like a thing, and then you don't want to come out across. You don't want to come across as rude, right? By referring to the baby as it. And now then the dilemma is whether you should use he or whether you should use she. And many times, babies is difficult to make out gender sometimes, right? And so it's a safe bet, so that it doesn't appear that you are promoting a patriarchal norms, right? In the tendency or the accepted norm, or to you want to be politically correct, is that you refer to the babies as she, right? And so you're promoting the feminine aspect of it, right? So again, these things in society, they keep on changing, and there are different ethos. And so when we read these books from that perspective, it just seems like somebody who's coming with that consciousness will think, this is you guys claim to be spiritual, but over here you're promoting a patriarchal norm, right? Again, well, the Vedic society in a way is patriarchal, and it's a completely different reason. What is the correct spiritual understanding of a patriarchal society? Of course, there are things which were misused and abused. Anyway, we're not going to get into the topic, but the proper understanding is this. So when we understand, when we read Srila Prabhupada books, and then when we come across masculine pronoun referring to the soul, right? The understanding is that because the soul is trying to act against one's nature and trying to be a Purusha, is referred to as a he. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. What's number 37? Shri Bhagavana Uvacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajoguna Samudbhavaha Mahasano Mahapapama Vidiyenam Iha Vairinam. Translation: the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath. and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So, lust is in the mode of passion, right? So passion, whenever we talk about passion, passion is action, right? Passion means I am not satisfied with my current situation. I want to change it. That is passion. Ignorance means I'm not satisfied with my current situation and I don't want to change it. Goodness means I'm satisfied with my current situation, right? So passion always means you feel something strong, you feel strongly about something and you want to change it. That is passion, right? So here in the context is that whenever there's an opportunity of enjoyment, right, the mode of passion surcharges, right, and the lust comes manifests. And so this lust is manifestation of the material mode of passion. And then when that lust is not fulfilled, right, in the end of second chapter, so it's kind of a similar theme in a different way Krishna is presenting, right? So in the end of second chapter, we discussed that what happens by meditation on objects, one develops attachment. From attachment, covetousness or lust develops. When the lust is not fulfilled, desire is not fulfilled, then one becomes angry. When one becomes angry, the intelligence is bewildered. When intelligence is bewildered, one cannot think properly and one falls in the material's cesspool. The similar idea is that later transforms into wrath, because sooner or later, we will realize that not all our desires are fulfilled at all times, right? So the frustration will come sooner or later. And because of this, one leads to self-destruction. So the purport Srila Prabhupada mentions that when a living entity comes in contact with material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the description or the distinction between lust and love is mentioned. Love is compared to gold and lust is compared to iron. Prema is defined as any kind of activity which is done to satisfy Krishna's senses. That is prema. The word prema is misused in this material world. In different romantic novels and different movies, you will see, the lover describes one's love and they use the word prema. But what is the original meaning of prema? So in the next verse, we'll discuss everything. There are double meanings of every word. There's a spiritual meaning and there's a material meaning. So a lot of words that we are used in a very material way, with a material consciousness. So I'll elaborate that in the next verse. But the real meaning of the word prema is to satisfy Krishna's senses. That is prema. Lust means kama. What is kama? Kama means any activity or desire to satisfy one's own senses or the senses of those with whom we identify as an extension of our bodies, which is our immediate family, caste, society, race, nation, all that. So there is a distinction between love and lust. So originally, what happens, just like the spiritual spark, when it's part of the bonfire, it retains its fiery nature. But when the spark ejects from the bonfire and falls on the ground, the fiery nature diffuses. Similarly, the spirit soul, as long as is associated with Krishna, the original swabhav or the nature of love, that is satisfaction, a desire for satisfaction of Krishna's sense is retained, but in association with matter, that is fully lost and transformed into lust. In other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as a milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. So we all have this experience. Sometimes milk, even if we are not purposefully making yogurt by mixing a warm milk with the culture of yogurt, especially in tropical climate, if you put warm milk outside, it will naturally transform into yogurt. So milk is in the mode of goodness, but when that milk comes in contact with mode of passion, a little sour, it transforms into yogurt. So that transformation, similar transformation happens between where love is transformed to lust. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, see, it leads to frustration, it turns into wrath. So you see, it's a similar analogy of the explanation, because Arjuna is still trying to understand, right? So Krishna already explained it. Now he's explaining in a different way. So wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity. And it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. So you have to conquer this lust. Wrath is manifestation in the mode of ignorance, right? So when one is trying to fulfill one's desire, right? So that is in the mode of passion. But when the desires are not fulfilled, then what does one do? One becomes full of anger, and in angry they are expressing just frustration on people around them. They would blame others for their failure. It's because of you that I failed, right? Or you blame the government, you blame some other authority. There's always someone else to blame. And why does one do that? Well, how is his ignorance? Ignorance is, now the person has given up. He says, I cannot fulfill, right? So that's why one is not satisfied with one's situation. That's why one is angry. And one does not want to continue making attempts to change one's situation, right? That the desire to make a change has now been given up, right? I cannot do it. It's not possible. Or it's not possible because of somebody else's fault, right? So that is all in mode of ignorance, when one is not satisfied with the situation and is not willing or able to change it, right? So is a mode of ignorance, wrath. So these modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. Just a sec. Sorry about that. Yeah. So this mode of passion, there are two options. When one is in the mode of passion, if one is able to restrain and take corrective actions to stop further degradation into mode of ignorance, and instead tries to elevate to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting. So we follow the rules and regulations of the scripture to elevate ourselves to the mode of goodness. Then one is saved from degradation of wrath. So one should not let the mode of passion overcome us. That is the use of proper intelligence. Otherwise, it will surely degrade into mode of ignorance and will destroy our spiritual life. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities are part and parcels of the spiritual bliss. Okay. So this is an indication of what is the reason of our existence. It's like Krishna is eternal, we are also eternal. We did not, it's not that we came into existence at some point in time. But then what is the reason for our existence? Well, we each of us have a very special relationship and a unique relationship with Krishna. Each of us are capable to do a unique service that no one else can do, and we are uniquely related. And Krishna, because he is supreme, is supremely filled with love and emotions. And love and emotions, again, cannot exist in vacuum. It needs to be exchanged. It needs to be exchanged with other personalities. And because Krishna has unlimited desires to exchange love in different bhava and different rasas, he needs unlimited expansions. We are all expansions of Krishna. And each of us have a very unique relationship with Krishna. So And what is our service? Well, we help Krishna in ever increasing his spiritual bliss. Mm. That is the reason of our existence. And so even when we come to this material world, forgetting our original spiritual nature, it also fulfills the desire of the Lord to reclaim the souls, reclaim the fallen souls. If there are no fallen souls, whom will the Lord reclaim? Right? The father has a desire to teach the child. But if the child is born all intelligent, right from all knowing, right from birth, and there is no opportunity for the father to teach. The desire for the father to impart knowledge, samskaras, good culture to someone. I cannot go and walk to a random person. Say, who are you? I'm not interested in hearing from you. But the child is naturally attached to the parents, and child is willing to listen. Any question, the child will go to the father or the mother and ask, what is this? Can you teach me? So the child becomes a medium for the father to exhibit this rasa and fulfill this desire to teach. So similarly, the Lord has a desire to reclaim the souls. In spiritual world, everyone is self-realized. They are all serving Krishna. And so there is no opportunity for Krishna to fulfill his desire to reclaim and teach. So in that sense, the material world provides that need to fulfill that need for Krishna. So, but we also have our partial independence, right? So we are not robots. If we are robots, then there is no love, right? We can be programmed to always serve Krishna. Well, then that's not love. It should be willing, right? If it is not by choice, then there is no question of love. So, but when there is a choice, there's always the possibility of misusing the choice, right? If 100% of the souls all the time they make the choice to serve Krishna, then it's not a choice, right? He says if the other option is not selected by anyone at any point in time, then what is the immediate reaction people would have? The game is rigged. Just like if the people go to the casino for gambling and no one ever wins, right? No one will ever go to a casino where where only the casino owner is winning all the time, right? The game is rigged. Similarly, when we say that we have our choice, and if everyone all the time is making the choice to serve Krishna, no one is making the other choice, right? Then it suggests that, well, it doesn't look like there is a choice, right? So the very fact that there is a choice means somebody will choose the other option, right? There will always be certain percentage of the population that will opt for it. So it is natural. But he misuse in the sense that it's against our nature, it's against our spiritual nature. By misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. Okay. They make the choice not to serve Krishna's senses, but one's own senses. So this material creation is created by the Lord to give the facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill this lustful propensity, to be the Purusha and not the Prakriti. And when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entity begin to inquire about the real position. Atatho Brahma Jigyasa. After many births, when one is frustrated again and again in one's attempt to be happy, right? We find, or even one is intelligent even in this life, one can come to the conclusion, they see others, oh, they think money will make me happy, but then you see uh, all the richest people in the world, they are all divorcees, right? They do not have a good married life, so money cannot buy a happy married life. That's one lesson. you're somebody who has a lot of fame, right? Riches, beauty. Many times they have a very miserable ending in the life, right? So just by observing nature, we see that all these things that people aspire for, that in itself cannot make one happy. And so one thinks that, well, the fact that I desire this, that means there should be some means to achieve it. Just like I'm hungry, and in the nature there is a means to fulfill the hunger. If I'm thirsty, right, I see that in the nature there is water which will fulfill my thirst. So all the needs are fulfilled by, there's a means in the nature to fulfill the need, fulfill whatever our needs are. And so our need is to be happy all the time, always, uninterrupted, without any mixed happiness. Full happiness. Mixed happiness means some miseries involved. We don't want that. We don't want any miseries, but still those miseries come. So that means there should be some way to fulfill it, and whatever I'm chasing for, whatever means that the world is seeking to fulfill, the need to be happy all the time, those means are not working. That means that there should be some other means. And what is that? Right? So the living entity then begins to question, who am I? Where did I come from? What is the purpose of life? And that is the beginning of spiritual life. If the Yes. So until the human being does not come to this position of spiritual inquiry, then the scriptures compare such human beings as dvipada pasu. They are animals, but two-legged animals. Because animals, their intelligence is not developed to raise a spiritual inquiry, right? So this inquiry is the beginning of Vedanta Sutras. Atatho Brahma Jigyasa, inquisitiveness into the absolute truth. Brahma means absolute truth. Atatho, henceforth. Now let's inquire what is the real purpose. Similarly, in Srimad Bhagavatam, the supreme personality or the supreme truth is described as Janmadi Yasya Yato Anvayad Itaratascha, right? See, origin of everything is the supreme Brahman. So origin of lust is also supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for supreme, or is transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. So how can lust be transformed into love? When instead of trying to gratify our own senses, we try to satisfy Krishna's senses. In this way, lust can be transformed into love. Similarly, wrath can also be used in Krishna's service. The example that is given is that of Hanuman, who exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana. So this wrath was not out of frustration. Hanuman did very calculation, he was very calculative. He said, I'm here, I want to get a sense of how powerful this Ravana is. That means, let me see. If I burn the city of Lanka, I want to see how they are able to counteract, for instance, right? So it was not out of frustration that he exhibited wrath. He was angry. He was definitely angry for what Ravana did, but he used his anger in service. So in Bhagavad Gita, Lord is also inducing Arjuna to engage his anger upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, they become our friends instead of our enemies. So everything has a purpose and a utility. The impersonalists, they are against the idea of person, right? The supreme truth cannot be person, because as soon as you say person, that means there is going to be anger, there is going to be lust, there is going to be all these things. And how can all these things exist in the supreme truth? Supreme truth means someone who is devoid of such propensity. But they do not understand that all this propensity also has a spiritual purpose. If engaged properly. So that's why there is a difference between the impersonalists and the personalists. Any questions on this particular verse before we move on? What's number 37? Okay, no questions. Move on. What's number 38? धूमेना व्रियते वह्निर् यथादर्शो मलेन च यथोल्बेनावृतो गर्भस्तथा तेनेदमावृतम्. Translation: as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So far we have defined what lust is, how lust could lead to destruction, where, right? Now the different gradations of lusts are described. And there are three metaphors used over here to describe the three gradations of lust. And they are climatic in their description, because sometimes gradations could be described in an anticlimactic fashion. That means you start with the highest degree of lust, and then you would go down to the lower levels. Here you're starting with the lowest level, and then you're going up to the highest level. So what is it? How do we understand this metaphor? So I'll give a brief description of what these metaphors are, and then in the purport we'll get a better understanding. And we'll reach Srila Prabhupada's explanation, further elaboration on what these metaphors are. So fire covered by smoke. So anytime you see a fire, just a sec. So this fire, whenever fire is covered by smoke, you can still see the fire, right? The smoke is there, it's surrounding the fire, but it's not that the flames are completely covered. You can still see the flames. So that fire, that's a low level of covering, where the spiritual nature is not completely overcome by lust. That's the metaphor that is given over here. Now, mirror that is covered by dust. Sometimes you go to, if there are like old homes or homes which have been locked for a long time, dust is such a thing that always creeps in through the crevices below the windows, through the doors. And what will happen is that the mirror, if there is a mirror inside the home, right, if it's hanging on the wall, you'll see that the mirror is fully covered with the dust. And it is covered to such an extent that you cannot make out that this is a mirror. Could be a photo frame, right? You might see the external frame a little bit, that something's hanging, but you don't know if inside the frame there is a mirror, or could be a portrait, right? Unlike fire, when it is covered by smoke, you're still able to see the fire. Here, what's happening is when mirror is covered by dust, you're not able to see the mirror. So it's an advanced degree of covering, right? But the dust can be easily cleaned, right? You can clearly use your hand or a cloth, and you could clean the dust without much effort. So though the mirror is fully covered, with little effort, one can clean it. Now the third degree of covering is an embryo that is covered by the womb. So that's when the embryo is inside the womb. One knows that when the embryo is there, one can make out that there is a living entity inside the womb. But you don't know what the features are, right? You don't know if it's a child, a male or a female, right? Is the child developing healthy? So those details are not there. One cannot easily make out. One has to wait. Unlike the dust that one can, clear very easily, the embryo or the child is not manifest until the delivery happens. Now there is another meaning to this, right? There are different species of life which are compared to these three different gradations they're covered by three different gradations of lust. And that's what we will read in the purport. But you can see, I just want to establish that there is a climatic progression of the different degrees of coverings over here. So what is the purport? In the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that the 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which the pure consciousness is obscured. That means the pure consciousness is covered by material body or by lust. There are 3 gradations to this. This covering is that of a lust, but under different manifestations, like the smoke in the fire, or dust on the mirror, or the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. Yeah, so living spark can still be perceived, just like when you can see the fire covered by smoke, you know that the fire is still there. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. So one is taking interest in spiritual life. One is has begun to practice Krishna consciousness. So one can see the spiritual spark. It's there. There might be still some coverings, material influence of the lust might be there, but it's not a high level of affection, right? In the sense that one is not completely under the influence of lust. Although the fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. Interesting. So whenever there is smoke, the fire is there, it's necessary. But what's happening, the fire is not fully manifested. The smoke is predominant. So this stage is likened to the beginning of Krishna consciousness. Now the second gradation is that dust on the mirror refers to cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. So when the dust is there in the mirror, we mentioned that we have to clean it. So this cleaning process, just like dust of the mirror can be cleaned, similarly the lust by which we are influenced can also be cleansed. How? By different spiritual methods. So that's the elaboration on that metaphor. And what is the best way? Well, the best way is to chant the holy names of the Lord, especially in Kali Yuga. Kali Santarana Upanishad describes that the best way to be delivered is by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And the third gradation, which is the embryo covered by the womb, is analogy illustrating the helpless position for the child. So now we look from the perspective of the child. So now earlier I was describing gradations from the perspective of person who is observing. So that is a little bit 1 degree apart. Now if we put ourselves in the position where this mirror belongs to me, I want to clean it, right? Then I have to engage in different spiritual methods to clean my mind, just like I would engage in cleaning the mirror using a cloth. Similarly, if I relate myself to the stage where I'm in my mother's womb, the embryo does not know where one is situated, what's happening when the body is being formed, and it's a dark, cramped place. It cannot move. The consciousness is very low. One does not understand what's going on around him, how the body, what's actually even happening, right? Just even if after the child is born, has very limited understanding, right? The child is just going by the instinct. When it's hungry, it starts sucking mother's breast to fulfill the hunger, and then some sort of inconvenience would cry, but has no idea, right, what's happening. So what to speak about the embryo, which is still inside the womb, right? So it's completely in the ignorance. So position of a living entity in the stage of an embryo is fully under the influence of ignorance. So The position Srila Prabhupada describes, the child in the womb is so helpless, he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees, right? So similarly, trees and others, the trees is a species which has very low consciousness. Uh, in the sense that, if you prick the tree won't protest. So it does not feel so much, it's not hurt to the extent that animals who are very sensitive to different stimuli, they are hurt and affected. They are not able to move around. They are helpless in that sense as well. And so they have a very low level of consciousness. So that is in the mode of ignorance. They are compared to the stage where the embryo is covered by the womb. On the other hand, the animals, they are in the mode of passion. A lot of animals, you see, they are impelled by their animal instinct. When they are impelled by the animal instinct, they are always, fully in the mode of passion. And the human beings, you can compare it in the mode of goodness. And so they are compared to the first stage where the fire is covered by the smoke. Animals and birds, they are compared to the second stage where the mirror is covered by the dust. And then trees is a species of life in the mode of ignorance, the last stage. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put into such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human beings. In the human form of life, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. It's like there is smoke, but if you blow air, right, you provide more oxygen and make arrangements, the fire will nicely manifest. Yeah, and it won't be overcome by smoke. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze, right? Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. Any questions on this particular verse? Verse number 38.
Prabhuji,
Jamin bhai.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nitin ji, go ahead.
no, Prabhuji, you go ahead.
I thanks Nitin ji. I just had one question, or maybe a confusion as always I am. So, like, can we say that the trees are the form of, we always look at Prakriti in both ways, Jad and Chetan, So trees we can say as a Jad because they cannot express their emotions. I mean, they don't have any emotions. Though you can see the like the branch or leaves are moving, but that is also done by air. Basically, nobody. I mean, tree is not doing by its own. So they are not. I mean, they are not able to basically express their emotions. Now, if I look at the other side, animals, it is exactly opposite. They are they are not steady or chetan. Jad. Basically, they can express all their emotions, but that emotions are not controlled. I mean, it's uncontrolled. And then when we look at ourselves, so we are somewhere in the middle where we don't represent a trees because we are not like them, or also we don't represent the animals because we can still control our emotions. But if I look at the different stages of life, so maybe as a kid, or when I'm in the womb, and the same thing when I'm at the age of, let's say, leave the world, I'm exactly in the same position, I would say, like a Jad, that I want to eat something, but after 70s or 80s, my teeth are not there, so I cannot eat. So I behave like a Jad. For the kid also the same, that he I mean, maybe 5 months old, he doesn't understand, or he doesn't know, what the things are, or maybe if he understands, but he cannot express his emotions. But if I look at 5 years old, then he knows that I want to eat a lot of chocolates. But at the same thing, when I think at 50 that I want to eat a lot of chocolates, but the diabetes is there waiting for me, or I already have it, so I cannot do it. So every time eating a chocolate, I look at it as a lust. And then at 50 also you have the same thing, but one point of time, at age of 5, if you eat the chocolates, it is fine because it is not going to be harmful to you. But at 50, if I do the same thing, then it is something which is going to give a harm to myself and my body. So is it right kind of comparison, or I'm doing some mistake?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So the first thing we need to understand is that this different gradations or consciousness, where the consciousness is evolved or is it less developed, right? That is of the body, right? This consciousness is manifested through the body, right? Now the body itself is inanimate, right? But the body is animated because of the presence of the soul. As soon as the soul leaves the body has no animation, right? It stopped acting. Now, what we are discussing is that to what extent that animation is fully manifested is constrained by the type of body. The body of a tree, by definition, has a higher constraint, whereas you say different emotions and expressions are cannot be fully expressed. On the other hand, birds and beasts, they are not so much constrained. They are able to express their emotions, but they're very impulsive in their because their intelligence is not refined. That means they go by instincts. Human beings, their intelligence is refined, and so not only they have emotions, but they use their superior intelligence and discrimination to sometimes curtail those emotions. And it's not the right time or place to express certain emotions, then they are able to curtail it. So the intelligence is more developed in human beings. Now, what you are referring is that even within a particular species, like humans, for instance, you give an example, it's not constant. That consciousness is pretty less developed in the embryo stage, and then as the child matures and develops, it slowly increases and peaks at a certain point in time, and then it goes on the downward part of the roller coaster, where and eventually that consciousness is curtailed forcefully in a different way until somebody gets very old. And so that is there. So you can think of it as a second harmonics, right? So there's an upper threshold defined by the human body, right? The human species, which says, well, this is the maximum that you can manifest your consciousness, right, within the human species. And that maximum is different for beasts and different for trees. But that maximum is achieved, through the course of life. It's not one immediately acts or achieves that level. And then once that peak is achieved, then again it comes down eventually. Like you can think of this as a second harmonics, just like in the harmonic study, you have multiple waves. You have the first harmonic wave, which defines the first pattern, the first, of the wave, but then you have the second harmonics, which is kind of nested on the first wave, right? So if you look at a second harmonic wave, I hope you know what I'm talking about, but here, I don't know if it's a good example, or a polynomial curve, right? In Excel, when you look at a polynomial curve, if you do a linear graph, right? When you do a linear graph, it's a straight line, and then you do a second order, a third order. The more curves, you're one wave going on, and on that wave there are multiple. There's a second layer on top of it. Anyway, you get the idea. I guess I'm saying. Does it answer your question?
Yeah.
That's why in the scriptures also another way they look at it is that they, instead of calling Jad and Chetan, they describe the life as Char Achar. Species which move and species that they don't move. So Jalchar are aquatics, they move in water, right? Then there are animals that move on the land, but they are Char. And Achar means those who don't move, right? So stone, they also have consciousness, but their consciousness is even more less than the trees. And so they are almost considered as non-living things. But apparently, that's why when we say mountains in the Vedic culture, the mountains, they are referred to as personalities. They are not lifeless. They have life, but their consciousness is even lower than that of the trees. I think I came across some scientific papers where they have done research, and they found that the stones, they have consciousness, but it's a very low level of consciousness. I'll see if I can find it. I'll share it with you. But in the scriptures, we always refer to mountains and rivers as personalities, and we don't call them inanimate. Though they're almost like inanimate, you can hardly perceive that. Okay. Prabhu, you had a question?
Yes, Prabhuji. So can you hear me?
Yes.
So Prabhuji, so the two other, the fire example was very clear that, as because in humans you can ignite that feeling of Krishna consciousness by blowing air into the fire. On the other extreme, the tree example is also very clear. I was not very clear with the middle one, like the mirror example. Now, how does that relate to someone who has lesser? Because when I look at this as like as a physical thing, it's easier to clean the dust from the mirror than igniting fire or removing smoke from the fire.
Right. So there are multiple metaphors over here. It depends which one you're using. So even human beings also, there are different gradations, right? Even though human being, they have the ability to fully manifest their spiritual consciousness. Many people, they are not ready for it. So even within humans, if you will have different gradations of people who are at different level of spiritual evolution. And so the same analogy of the fire, smoke, mirror, dust, and the embryo and the womb, you can also apply just to the entire spectrum of human beings, right? So there are just three different gradations you can apply to whatever category. If you apply to across all species, then you can say, well, trees and animals and humans. But then if you look at the spectrum of just human beings, then also you can apply. And then you say people who are naturally inclined spiritually, they can compare to fire covered by smoke. But others who are not, it requires some work on those individuals, right? Either they voluntarily work, or somebody, if they're fortunate to come in contact with a spiritually empowered personality, then that personality would, by their influence, will start that cleansing process of their mind, which is covered by lust, right? So it will be gradual, slow, but that effect would be there. So it requires some work. Until then, you'll see when you look at that individual, it has no spiritual interest. Other people, they are naturally inclined to spiritual process, so they are compared to that. You can see that fire. This person has some spiritual interest. The others might be completely atheists, but an empowered personality can work on those individuals. But that work is like that work required to clean the mirror. So in that sense, you can apply that analogy to human beings also. And then some people might be even further under the influence of or covering of lust, where there's no attempt could be even made, right? There's no possible of engagement. Does that answer your question, or do you
Yes,
have a
Prabhuji.
different analogy in mind?
No, Prabhuji, that answers me.
And even in animal species of life, you see when the Lord appears as Matsya incarnation, so he did not give us spiritual instructions to the fishes, but in that Matsya form, he was he had a gigantic form. What is it, like 8 million miles long, right? It covers the entire Bhumandala. And the aquatics, now when the pralay comes and the entire Bhumandala is flooded, all the living entities would die except the aquatics. The aquatics are naturally, they are comfortable in the water, and the ocean was full of all these aquatics. But all the species, they were annihilated. But the aquatics had never seen such a large fish, and so they were attracted by the Matsya form of the Lord, and they were following the Matsya incarnation of the Lord, and they were so attracted by it, and they were appreciating in their, though they have no words or even emotions, like from the when you look at beasts, you can see they are angry, or they're sometimes sad. Those emotions you can make out from their face. But when you look at fishes, there is no expression of emotions on on their body. You cannot look at a fish and say it's happy or angry or sad, but they have the feelings, and so they were just following the Lord in his form as a fish, and that was accepted by the Lord as an exhibition of devotional service, that they are attracted by the Lord, and in that form they were delivered. You see, so even in the body of aquatics, which is even lower compared to the beasts on the land, from a consciousness perspective, they could achieve liberation. So that required some work, and only the Lord can do that work. So that's a cleansing process. So you can apply that analogy even when it comes to other species of life. Okay. Any other questions? What's number 39? आवृत्तं ज्ञानमेतेन ज्ञानिनो नित्यवैरिणा कामरूपेण कौन्तेय दुष्कुरुनेना नलेन च. Translation: thus the wide living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So when living entity is covered by this enemy in the form of lust, what happens? The living entity is misdirected and is always trying to gratify one's own desires and senses. And it feels that just if I fulfill my desires, I'll be happy. The fire always thinks that just if I get a little bit more fuel, just give me a little bit, pour a little bit more ghee, and then I'll be happy. I'll be satisfied. But what happens when you put ghee in the fire? Is the ghee satisfied, or is the fire satisfied when you put ghee inside fire? What happens?
It fire gets more.
Yeah, it burns more, and now it wants even more. So by fulfilling, as long as one continues to gratify one's own lust, the lust increases, especially if it's done at a gradual rate, in the sense that the other example is that if one overindulges, then one gets frustrated and he says, I don't want to pursue any more sense gratification. If one overindulges in it, and then one artificially renounces, but that's not spiritual perfection, right? So we earlier discussed in the last class, what is it? Attachment and aversion. They are two sides of the same coin. Just like there is fire, and if you put little ghee, it's going to burn more, and it's never satisfied. But if you put an entire bowl of ghee, what will happen? The fire will suppress. So it appears like, oh, the desire to enjoy is gone forever, but it is artificially suppressed. It's not naturally suppressed. So when one overindulges in sense gratification, then one is frustrated, and then if one flips from attachment to aversion, but that aversion is not spiritual perfection. Purport: it is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maithunya Agara, or shackles of sex life. So those who are too much addicted to sex life, their material entanglements keep on increasing. There's no end to it, whether it is licit or illicit. If one is really addicted to either licit sex life or illicit sex life, when that addiction is there, different kind of material entanglements just keeps on increasing. When one engages in illicit relationships, then definitely, it could be lead to crime. It could lead to broken marriages, and just a little bit of pleasure for few minutes can lead to great troubles. Just a sec. See. Okay, and then the other is even when one, even within licit relationships, if one is one is really addicted to it, then also it creates different kind of problems. One is when one gets implicated in lot of karmic reaction, in the sense that one is not simply interested in uh, raising children and begetting children, but one is simply interested in gratifying one's own senses, right? So that also has its own implications, different way. One has to indulge in a lot of artificial contraceptive methods, and there are other implications. Then sometimes there are unwanted pregnancies, right? So there's this huge case going on right now, the Roe versus Wade, which was from the 70s. Now they are trying to overturn it. So all this, at what stage you can say that embryo has life? Can we abort at week 6? Can we abort at week 4? Is it okay to abort at week 16? So all these things. But then, obviously there's sin involved in, you can scientifically say that there's no life before certain term, but then, obviously the life is there, right? And then, all this leads to different kind of sinful activities. So anyway, that's why the addiction to sex life is one of the ways, one of the main ways actually, that one is bound in this material world. So in ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within the bars. Similarly, criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the world, laws of the Lord, they are shackled by sex life. So different kind of chain. It's a subtle chain. It's not gross uh, 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 imprisonment, but one is imprisoned because of such proclivities. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense and sense gratification means increased duration of material existence of a living entity. The more one engages in sense gratification, their duration of material existence in this universe increases. Therefore, this lust is a symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. So that's a trick. Because of that chapala, momentary pleasure, one is implicated and bound for much longer duration than one can imagine. So this world is this material world is compared to the fortress of Durga. So dur means difficult, far away, something that is far, you cannot easily achieve, and ga means to go, right? So Durga, her job is to fulfill all the material desires that people have in this world. For what? If people have, if their desires are fulfilled, they don't want to leave the prison. So this is, so the external energy of the Lord Durga, she has created this such a nice prison that no one wants to leave. You're happy in this prison. So it's a prison that no one wants to leave. And how does she manage to do that? Well, she'll fulfill all desires. That's why people, they approach Durga. Durga will give quick gratification. The desires will be fulfilled, and so they are happy. I remember when I was living in Phoenix, they are one of the largest detention centers for illegal immigrants, and they are treated very nicely. And so I was going there for spiritual counseling for those who, you cannot call them inmates because they are not criminals. They are referred to as the guests of the U.S. government. That's one of the first things they teach you when you have to go through a training in order to go and meet the residents for some spiritual counseling. And it's a luxurious facility. And they say they spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a soccer ground so that they can play over there. They have access to video conferencing to connect to their consulate officer from of the country from which they belong. There's library over there. They have dorms. They have flat screen televisions, and then you can, if you want to, a lot of Latinos come, so there is a separate section where you can just watch. And it is a huge wall, and there are multiple screens on it. And then you can have headphones and you can listen so that that you can you're not, others are not disturbed. And so it's like really fancy facility. And they were saying that many times some of their cases, they're pending for the to be adjudicated, right? Sometimes they take 18 months, 2 years, and somebody is filed for asylum, and they have to really prove that there is danger for them to return to their original country, and so that's why they cannot go. So all that just takes forever. And they get so used to all these luxuries. Many times they say that when they are let go, okay, now you get your asylum refugee status and your green card or whatever, right? And they come back in the sense that they come back knocking, saying that, hey, you just left me out, what I'm going to do, right? It's difficult, I have to find a job now, I have to work, it was so nice and cozy inside, can't you just let me in, right? So they had a restricted they're restricted in some way, in the sense that they didn't have freedom, they're enclosed inside that facility. But the facilities are so nice, they don't want to leave. So our situation is analogous to that. So we are all guests. We are not, we are actually criminals, but we are referred to as the guests of Durga Devi, and Durga Devi is fulfilling all the desires. So that is the situation. Any questions on this particular verse? Okay. Move on to the next verse. Verse number 40. Yeah, I think we should be able to cover in 8 minutes. I don't know. But let's get started. There's a lot that to be spoken on this verse. Okay. Anyway, we'll begin. Indriyani manobuddhir ashyadhisthanamuchyate eter vimohayati esha jnanamavritya dehinam. Translation: the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So, if we have to conquer lust, that means we have to study the enemy. Where is the enemy residing? How is the enemy acting in those locations? So that is very important. So we'll try to understand that. Purport: the enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body. So this is war, and now the strategic positions are captured. Just like there's a war between India and Pakistan, India and China, and it's in these high altitudes in Ladakh, and where there's no life, there's no one living there. But why they are trying to get that peak? Who controls this particular peak? Because this peak is of strategic importance. You can have better visibility into the territory that stretches for miles from that location. It's easy to attack from that altitude to the enemy who is on the other side at a lower altitude. So these are the positions of strategic importance. So similarly in our body, mind, intelligence, senses are positions of strategic importance. And when that's conquered by our enemy, then we are in trouble. So Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer this enemy of lust, they know that where it can be found. Mind is the center of all activities of the senses. And thus when we mind is the center of all activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all the ideas of sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and the senses become repositories of lust. That's an interesting concept. So what is mind? Mind actually is a repository of different ideas, right? So here Prabhupada is saying that as soon as you hear about something, mind visualizes that object. And as soon as one visualizes the object, the mind is flooded by the desires to enjoy those objects. So, if you really want to understand, mind is such a fine material instrument. So mind is the everything that is possible in this material world, in the universe, all possible ideas, they exist a priori in the mind. I'll give you an example. Just like a child, when you teach a child to identify, let's say, an animal, say cat, right? So maybe in a picture book or in real life, you show a cat, right? And it says you're ascribing just the name cat to that object. But the idea of the object cat is already existing a priori, is already existing in the mind by default. It's kind of pre-programmed in it. But now you're assigning a name to it. And now next time, say the child sees, as the child is growing and learning, the child sees a completely different species of cat or a dog, for instance, right? Maybe in the picture book you showed a small Chihuahua dog, right? The next time you see a big dog, right? Maybe a husky. You don't have to teach the child that this is a dog. The child can relate, right? He will be immediately able to say that this is a dog. How did that happen, right? Just like you teach a child to identify, well, this is a stone. You're just ascribing the name stone to the object. Now, the stone comes in so many different sizes, so many colors, so many textures, different weight. And, sometimes, I was seeing my child grow, you take him to Snoqualmie River or some river bed, and there is water flowing over all the stones in the riverbed. And I never had to teach him. He could look at it. This is the first time he's seeing those kind of stones, but he would say these are the stones. Right? So the idea of the stone exists a priori in the mind. On the other hand, if you have to teach a computer or a machine how to distinguish between a cat and a dog, it's an impossible exercise. You know why? If you want to, without human intervention or even with human intervention, it becomes a logically impossible problem to solve. For instance, if the machine has to make that distinction, then it has to first of all find out what are all the unique characteristics of cat which do not exist in the dog. Then it has to find out one has to program all the unique characteristics of dog which do not exist in the cat, because some things are common, like both of them have 4 legs, they have fur, they have 2 eyes, they have 2 ears. How do you teach, right? So in order to do that, the computer has to be fed with information about all the different breeds of cats that can potentially exist. Then similarly, one is to be fed with all the breeds of dogs that exist. And then the computer can try to figure out what is common across them. And you have to tell computer this is these are all dog breeds and these are cat breeds. But if the computer already knows that these are cat breeds and these are dog breeds, then that the problem itself is solved. The problem is that we don't know which is cat and what is dog, and that's why we want to program the computer so it can find out what is cat and what is dog, right? So it is a classification problem. So computer does not know what is cat and dog, but in order to teach that, one has to feed all the cat images or all the dog images. But then how do you classify as a cat? And how do you classify it as a dog when you're feeding it and you tell them this is a cat, but it does not even know it is a cat, right? So it comes into this circular reasoning problem where the unknown is unknown, you cannot solve it. But the mind, you don't have the problem, because in the mind, everything exists a priori. So mind is a reservoir of all the ideas. But because it's a material mind, we are prone to sense enjoyment. And when mind is covered by lust, as soon as we hear an idea about hear about an object, as soon as that idea is manifest in the chain of thoughts, one wants to enjoy it. For instance, if you hear Rasagulla, something that we like, or a music that we really like to hear, as soon as somebody talks about it, those memories come in. We want to, the lust overcomes and we want to enjoy it. So this is the position of a conditioned living entity. On the other hand, someone whose mind is spiritualized, right? That person, as soon as they hear about a sense object, because their senses are trained, their mind is trained, they would think, oh, this object, how would Krishna enjoy it? Or they would remember a particular pastime in which Krishna enjoyed it. Just like the example that is given, Vishwamitra, he was doing tapasya, but as soon as he heard the ankle bells of Menaka was dancing around, lust aroused in his heart, right? And he was not able to continue his austerity. And then he stopped his austerity and then he indulged in enjoyment with the heavenly damsel. On the other hand, if somebody like Haridas Thakur, who is of spiritual consciousness, his mind is always focused on serving the Lord. If he, if such a devotee hears again the ankle bells, it will remind him of the ankle bells of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is also dancing, right? He wears the ankle bells and he goes about doing Harinam Sankirtan. So you see the same ankle bell sound reminds different things to a person who is of material consciousness, whose mind is surcharged by lust, reminds that individual of the dancing damsels that one can enjoy, because that mind is overpowered by lust. On the other hand, one who is of spiritual consciousness, one who has conquered lust, one does not have any trace of that. When one hears the same dancing bells or the ankle bells, right? One would be reminded of the devotees or of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this particular example, who is also dancing in ecstasy. So in this way, we can understand and analyze that how lust resides in the mind. What is the function of mind, right? So we discussed three things. One is mind is a repository of a priori ideas. Everything that can possibly exist, the idea of those objects already exists in the mind. Now, depending on whether we are conquered by lust or we have conquered lust, when we hear those objects or when the mind is filled with certain ideas, it will remind us of sense enjoyment, our own sense enjoyment, or it will remind us of the Supreme Lord and his devotees and their enjoyment, right? So that is the difference between whether one is afflicted by lust or love. Okay. Similarly, there is other discussion of intelligence and senses. I think it requires elaborate discussion. So maybe we'll do it next time. I know we're already up on time. Is it all right?
Yes, Prabhuji.
And so next time when we start, I'll again start and elaborate more on this topic, because I'm not sure if it's clear. Did it make sense what I explained, how mind is full of a priori ideas?
We can probably
Yeah.
benefit from one more discussion, Prabhu. Yes.
Yeah, yes, we'll definitely discuss that, because I know it's a little complex.
I agree. I didn't quite grok this, so I'd appreciate covering it again next week.
Yeah, definitely. If we'll elaborate this a little longer next time, but just like a lot of artificial intelligence, when we call, we are programming and we are putting human intelligence in it. You have to really tell that this is a cat image, and then the computer will try to extract, the machine learning algorithm will try to extract the common features, but the computer does not know that it's a cat. So in order to extract features, we have to put labels, right? Label, okay, you have to label that this is such and such thing, right? But if there are no labels, then the computer cannot figure out, right? First of all, it's trying to figure out how to tell a cat apart from a dog, right? But in order to do that, I have to feed cat images. That means I should know that this is a cat. But that's the problem I'm trying to solve. I don't know what is cat, right? That's the logic I was trying to say, right? I don't know if that makes sense. If it still does not make sense, I'll try to gather my thoughts and then explain in a logical way. But that's the essence. Does it make sense?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Yeah, kind
maybe
of.
with some real life examples, it will make more concrete base.
Yeah, I think it's worth discussing. How mind does not need. By one, as soon as you ascribe a name, the idea is already there. But you cannot really teach a computer without human intervention. But yeah, let's elaborate on the topic a little bit more next time. Any other questions on this topic? Okay, no more questions. So we'll conclude today's class. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.